Well, hey everyone, you have successfully survived another week. It is Friday, and we are here with another episode of Certified Forgotten. Normally, we don't congratulate you on getting to Friday, but this being 2025 and all, it does feel a little bit like a minor accomplishment. If this is your first episode, this is a Certified Forgotten week, which means we are doing a full hour-long episode with a very, very, very special guest. But before we get to our guest, I want to check in with my friend and co-host, Matt Donato. How you doing, buddy?
I survived Sundance barely. Wrote a lot of things, but we all know Fantastic Flu if you've gone to Fantastic Fest or like Festival Flu, Con Crud, all these things. I've done a pretty good job avoiding that all my life, but I came home from Sundance and I have been laid out for like 5 days. I'm better now, but like I've never had that post-festival knock the shit out of you feeling like I've had this time. So first Sundance was fun. Yay. The after effects I've never had as bad.
So should I be looking for your Critics' Choice Award photos, or are they all you half dead, basically?
Oh, no, we're good. I specifically, we polished, so we're good for Critics' Choice because I was not missing it because they rescheduled. The first date was during Sundance, and the second reschedule was the one I actually could attend. So we're in high spirits.
I love that. Well, you and I are in high spirits today, too, because we get to talk about a really talented guest, and we get to talk about a really interesting movie. So, Donato, can you do introductions, please?
I will do a very brief introduction because, as always, need no introduction on this podcast. But it's funny you mentioned CCAs because this person I will be seeing at the CCAs because of VHS Beyond. And also, I like the fact that we had Jordan Downey on prior, so we get the first segment in VHS to talk about. And now we're bringing the back end of it. We get the bookends of VHS Beyond on the podcast. So here today to talk to us about Ghostwatch and VHS Beyond is filmmaker and actress Kate Siegel. Kate, thank you for being here.
Hi, thank you guys so much for having me. VHS Beyond is a real human centipede of filmmakers, and I'm thrilled to be in last position. That's disgusting.
It's all right. I think everybody knows what you meant.
Inspiration pours through us all.
Correct. Yeah. And I think technically you probably get the most inspiration if I remember how Human Centipede. I haven't actually seen the film.
I actually think, just to make a sidebar, I think being in the last position of number 5 in a Human Centipede is pretty good positioning, because by the time it gets to you, it's probably not much to say.
Yeah, but I don't know. I'd ask Jordan.
So much. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you. That was Kate Siegel, everybody, with her 1 minute play. Where do I want to be on the Human Centipede?
We should ask Jordan Downey, though, because I think he might say his position is better.
Oh, no. Being number 1 is the worst. As somebody who, I really I'm very much a people pleaser. I guess my anal retentiveness would come into play, which is nice. You guys, this is not where I had planned to start at all.
You're fine. Well, here, let me, we got a couple of questions we want to ask you. I will start with this to give it a nice little pivot. When you were working on your short, do you have the option? Was there ever any conversation about where they would slot into the order of things in VHS Beyond? Did you have the option of saying, I really feel like this would fit better in the middle versus near the end?
No. When you're shooting your short, they don't really tell you anything about that. That becomes the problem of the executives and the programming. And everyone has an idea of where they want to be. I knew that I loved the idea of being either first or last, with last to me being, the ideal spot. I hoped for it. And occasionally, Josh Goldblum, the producer, would be like, it's really feeling like a cleanup batter here. It feels like you're really doing something. And I'd be like, I can't be thinking about achievements in this moment, but I'm thrilled to be at the end. I think it's just the right place for this kind of existential dread to live.
Were you collaborating with the other filmmakers? Not obviously on your short, you were doing your work, kind of eyes on your own paper, but thinking about the anthology on a whole, did you all have a group chat? You were kind of okay, this is kind of where I'm leaning, this is what I'm doing, or completely blind?
Completely blind. I didn't see anybody else's short until the premiere at Fantasia.
Fantastic.
Guys, I'm out of my mind. I'm living in America in 2025. But until the premiere, I hadn't seen it. I did ask Chloe Acuna to come to set because I wanted the head of Ratma in my short, and it didn't make it to the cut, but it's there in the spaceship.
That's amazing. That's like the end of what is it, Predators? The second one where they have the aliens, you were this close to getting your connected universe going.
It was good because that was the one when I watched Ratma, I I was so blown away by the possibilities of a short film, and a short film within the world of VHS and the support for storytelling and what you could accomplish. And I used it as a guiding light for throughout the process for Stowaway. I was just so impressed, and I'm such a fan.
Well, I have a list of questions here I was going to ask, and we're moving through them backwards, which I kind of love. Talking about being inspired by Ratma, how did this come about as, your first directorial project? How did this come about as the thing that you were like, this is where I want to try stepping behind the camera?
Well, it was interesting because my journey as an actress was pretty fraught and involved a lot of like crawling through broken glass to get what I wanted. And for some reason, it's been a bit the opposite for directing. They had called my manager and said, "Hey, was Kate ever interested in directing? We're interested in hearing a pitch from her at VHS." And my first response was no, because, I live with a director and I know how much work it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I always thought of myself as a single department worker. Like, I am in the acting department or I am in the writing department. I don't know if I could take on the whole meal. And so they went away on their merry way. And then they came back and they said, really, we'd love to just talk to Kate about this. And I was in the kitchen taking that call from my manager, and my husband Mike came running in from another room gesturing wildly, and I was like, what? He's like, and he just starts nodding furiously and pointing. And so I was like, I think I will take the call. And Mike like nods. I get off the phone and he was like, this is a great idea, because we've watched every single installment of VHS. We love it. We love working in that way. And he was like, this is the perfect place for you to start, because there's a scaffolding for you. You're familiar with the entity. You can focus on one story. He's like, this is a brilliant way for you to find out if this is something you want to do or not. And I thought about that for a long time. And I was like, well, before I figure out if I'm going to dive in, I really wanted to know what I wanted to talk about. And I was like, what is it that Kate, will bring that I think is worth watching? And I know what it is in acting, but I wanted to figure out what it was in directing. And once I had a grip on that, it kind of moved very quickly. I went in, had my first conversation with Josh, and I talked about like a handful of insane ideas, like a Muppet version of VHS. I wanted to do a musical, which unbeknownst to me was already being done in the season. And then I was like, I also have this idea of like a story where everybody does what they think is the right thing to do, and that's what goes horribly wrong. And he was like, what's that? And so I went away and I talked to Mike, and we decided to collaborate on the story. Mike wrote it, and we were off to the races.
I know that there's a lot of stereotypes, I guess, about actors when they move behind the camera, that, they're more indulgent of performance rather than being tighter. Varies entirely from person to person. And I don't know how much it holds true across the board. Were there any things that you found yourself getting into, habits or even like new skills that you wanted to develop, where you were like, I'm not an actor, I'm not performing, I'm a filmmaker, things you had to really adjust on?
Well, it was interesting. I don't necessarily like to put up walls or don'ts or won't when I'm starting a new creative thing. So what I tried to do is find how my point of view could make different sections more specific. And what I found was the way my camera work ended up being was very emotionally motivated.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain amount of found footage that you have to kind of buy into this idea that the camera is being operated by a person. And to a certain degree, each segment of VHS asks you to have that or not at a different degree. But for me, I wanted that to be believable at every single step. When she's operating the camera, when the camera is floating in anti-gravity, when the camera has weight, when the camera doesn't have weight, like I needed that to be clear. And so oftentimes when Michael Famignari, my DP, was operating, I was next to him directing him. And so as he's approaching a C-stand that's supposed to stand in for a spaceship in the desert, I'm whispering to him things like, oh my gosh, are you going to do this? Are you really going to walk up to the spaceship? And then he'd stop and I go, take a deep breath. Take 3 shallow breaths, so that breathing existed in an emotional state in the camera work. And then there were times when my lead actress, Lana Pierce, was in special effects work, getting into her alien, different versions. And I decided to operate the camera myself for a lot of the interviews, which she would then come in and ADR. And so I would be there in performance, not as an actor, but as the camera. And I think that's when I fell in love with found footage as a medium, because it allows the filmmaker to be in performance. And as I've played with coverage since then, in my own time, not anything you guys could see yet, but just as I move forward in my directing journey and people are offering me things or I'm pitching things, I think of coverage in the same way as the observer and the camera, what their opinion is, what their point of view is on the person who is performing. And that helps with storytelling.
So, and you mentioned Alana Pierce at this point, so obviously your lead actress who does so fantastically
She's
in it.
incredible.
Right, but it's funny because I reviewed the film for IGN and I had to write a little, little
Yeah.
asterisk there saying like Alana Pierce was an IGN writer for X amount of years, so like this is not
Mhm.
biased, it just turned out this way. But speaking to that, you're taking on directing for the first time and doing it, and you're talking about the experience right now. Was there like a kinship between you and Alana? Because again, like I knew Alana from video games, not from
Yeah.
acting, obviously. So like, was there we're both kind of approaching this from a new angle and a new life cycle, and like, did you bond over that?
Absolutely. Alana and I have known each other for a while. She dates one of my very good friends, probably my best friend. And I've always been really into her as a person. She just has a great spirit and a great charisma and an incredible talent when it comes to her work in video games and in like voice performing. And I also knew that I wanted somebody, because the whole VHS project is non-union, which means any of the like Flavengers I couldn't pull from. I originally wanted to work with Sam Sloyan, but I couldn't. And so I wanted someone who was comfortable in front of the camera, but was still non-union. And Alana, just because of the work she does, wasn't in the Actors Union at the time. She is now. And hilariously, after the fact, I had to keep telling Alana, you're much more comfortable in front of a camera than this character is. Because this is the 80s, 90s, nobody was looking at themselves as much as we are now. But she came on with such an incredible generosity of spirit. And she was like, I just want to make sure that this process is good for you, that you, even though it was her first time, she had such a professionalism beyond her resume. And so I love her even more now than I did then. I think she did an incredible job. She was very easy
Yeah.
to direct.
And I'm fascinated by the character that she played because, on paper, especially within the realm of sci-fi, this is a type of character that is kind of relegated to the sidelines a little bit. The conspiracy theorist, the true believer, they're not necessarily the one that's going through the catharsis, kind of the main character. So how did you and Alana ensure that the notes of empathy, the notes of grace that you wanted to have about the character as a mother, as somebody seeking for truth, I'm sure all of that is there on the page. You can like sense that this is what you want her to be. How do you translate that when you're working together?
Well, you highlight the parts of her personality and performance that allow the audience in, like in that very quiet moment when she realizes she taped over her daughter's birthday party.
Hmm.
And that's really the only. Alana naturally has quite a rapid quality of speech. I also have I talk fast, I shoot fast. And so I was like, we need to find the times when we slow down, because we have to deliver a bunch of information that after the fact actually isn't that important. Like, it's important because the science checks out. But what we really need to know is she actually was the best mother she could be. And then there's there's this other thing where we talk about, she's in the car and she's like, screw you, Stanford, screw you, like Steve, screw you guys. And I was like, that needs to be elevated because everybody knows that feeling. Like, it's
Yeah.
time for me to prove myself. Everyone said I couldn't do it. And here this moment is happening. And these emotional beats kind of become signposts for us all to hold on to as I bring them further and further away from reality into the science fiction of the story. So the beginning of the story needs to be very grounded in her emotional performance as well as in the camera work. You have to feel the weight of that camera, which is why you start with it sliding off the car. The first thing you experience is gravity. And throughout this, you see her drop it or not drop it, because to me, making you very familiar with gravity on Earth, which we all know and, kind of take for granted, needed to be there so that when that moment comes and the camera lifts for the very first time, there can be a moment of awe because you've spent so much time becoming tuned in with how heavy a camera is.
Yeah.
Also, you had to keep in mind that we're shooting on an Alexa, which is like a bazillion times heavier than a camcorder. And so I had to say, like, well, how fast does a camcorder fall versus the Alexa? And so I have the one that you see her hold once or twice. I own it. I bought it on Etsy, and I would I would turn it on and I would drop it to be able to show Fimignari exactly how fast it needs to go. Or I would we would talk when we were trying to build the glitches, I would smash into the camera and try to make it as real as possible. Obviously, we had to take a bunch of artistic license in there because of time and budget, but the work was done, and I think the intention translates, and that's true of her performance as well.
I'm always curious with these VHS movies or any kind of found footage that is outdating what you're
Mhm.
shooting. Like, is that the hardest part? Just trying to replicate the older technology almost?
I think you say hard, I say exciting.
Mm.
That to me was another reason why, like, I was not required to use VHS technology as evidenced by my compatriots in arms, fellow centipeders, but I thought the VHS technology is the fun part of it, of the segment, of the franchise in general. VHS, it's in the title, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, no, of course I'm doing VHS." And so then I got to go in, they had a whole library of tests of different cameras from that time period, and so I got to watch their tests and decide exactly which camera I wanted to use and what kind of tape. And then when we do the transfer, after you do color and sound and special effects and everything, what I asked them to do was take the entire digital file and transfer it to a VHS tape. It's a tape transfer. And so I have a VHS of the movie and then transfer it back to digital so that we have the right stuff.
That's fun.
It was so fun.
That's got to be. There's got to be a VHS release of VHS Beyond happening at some point, right? VHS is cool again.
Yeah, hear it, Shutter. What's up now? Just stowaway. That's
Yeah,
what it
just that one clip.
Just stowaway.
Just the final centipede. None of the other ones count.
Just the marshmallows.
I want to ask about the design that you were working on, because you're talking about a lot of the camera movement, but once we get inside the ship too, the environment that Alana is in, the environment that you created is I don't ever want to accuse other VHS shorts of being low concept. I think that's part of the fun, but I do think that you're doing something that is ambitious with setting in a way that not every VHS filmmaker does because they don't want to. So I'm curious what it was like to construct the ship and the logic and the science and how that all fit together for you.
Well, it was an ever evolving organism. What was on the page and what was on my storyboards was a lot more like the Eon Flux cartoon, which I think is like my number one inspiration for everything I do. That thing scarred itself in my brain every single episode. And so it was a little bit more linear, and it was a little bit more um, like I had this idea for a honeycomb system and an egg, because I thought about what natural, because I want it to be organic. I have this idea that they're very organic beings inside a shell. And I wanted the ship to be your most organic shape that would withstand the actual pressure from traveling through space and time. And so those shapes are your like honeycomb shape and your egg shape. And an unbelievable amount of pressure can be applied to those shapes before they crack. But again, you're underneath this incredible budgetary restriction and an incredible time restriction. And also, the way we ended up deciding to do zero gravity, I couldn't have an enclosed space. I needed to swing things around and move infrared lights everywhere. And so Calder, our production designer, he is a sculptor as well. And he works mostly in cardboard. And what ended up happening was we went back and forth a bunch. And in my original storyboards, the filaments are things that zap in and zap out. Like the way, like this is derivative, but like the way Spider-Man shoots webbing.
Sure. Yeah.
And so it's like pin her and then pull her. But that's not possible in what we were doing, like maybe in the future, but not now. And so he said, what about those hard-boiled egg slicers? And that to me took me immediately to HARP. And then HARP to me took me to, oh, now I know how these animals, these aliens communicate. It's instead of through light waves, it's through sound waves. And so then we started talking about the exoskeleton of a cockroach. And that kind of like, there's like a, if you've ever had like an ant infestation or a cockroach infestation, there's like a dry smell to it.
Yep.
And so this stuff started and we just went nuts. And he built that out of cardboard on the stages. It's literally a sculpture. And every inch of it is sculpted with cardboard and then painted and then sealed. And then we strung guitar wire for when it was earthbound and in chroma. And then we had to tear down that section and put in infrared filaments for when it was in space and shot in infrared.
And you're just making this up as you go. Yeah,
Fuck yeah, I am.
there is no book for how to shoot a music-based,
No.
extraterrestrial life form spaceship thing.
But this is like the benefit of having, like when I tell you I had never picked up a camera before. This is the first thing I've ever shot in my whole life, from shot listing to everything. Everything was the very first time. And so there's a certain amount of that. And it's why I didn't want to collaborate with the other directors too much. It's why I sort of said to Mike, tell me nothing. And it's why it's just like me and Fimignari in our offices. And I'd be like, okay, but this is what I was hoping for. And what if we did it like this? Like so the first thing, we have these nanobots. And I knew that how I wanted the nanobots to move was sort of like the flocking of sparrows, where you like look up in the sky and it's this weird thing.
Cicadas,
and that was too complicated digitally to make it that specific. And so then one day I was playing with my son and daughter, and they have these calming jars. Kids have them. It's where they have glitter in a vinegar and oil mixture so that when you shake it, the glitter settles very slowly. And it was like an Einstein Apple moment. And I grabbed my iPhone and I grabbed the calming jar and I shook it and I put it on the table and I shoved the camera right next to it. And I recorded the calming jar just floating so you could see the room behind it, but like you saw all this glitter. And I sent that off to Justin, BFX, and I was like, this is it. And so by the luck of having a support staff who was extremely competent and experienced and creative and collaborative, I was able to have crazy ideas and present it to them. And he's like, oh, what we do is we create a program where the particles have a magnetic point. And he was able to translate my ideas into reality. And that's, when Mike was saying the benefit of stepping into the 7th installment of VHS and bringing on a DP who's been doing this for decades. I was able to dream as big as I wanted. And my only job was to not chicken out.
Yeah, and you can really tell that, like, the VHS crew themselves, the producers, everyone, like, they have clued into their formula so well at this point. And even though this was obviously a reach being sci-fi, they haven't done like a sci-fi based one yet. They were so smart putting yours last, because of the way that the stories ramp, at least in my opinion. You start off with Storks, which is just hits the ground running. It is the most energetic of the bunch.
Yes.
And everything else is kind of like a slow decline, but like in quotes, because that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
And yours is the most just like unsettling, dreadful, but also like lulls you into this like weird sense of like calm.
Yeah.
And it's the most sci-fi too. Like it's so funny to say, like, in the sci-fi version, everything else kind of like, meh, it's there adjacent, but
There's
yours
aliens,
is like, no, yeah, there's aliens, but like yours feels like what the assignment was. Like yours
Thank
feels
you.
like what was meant to be every single one.
Yeah. I'm pathologically a Gold Star student, so it never occurred to me to color outside those lines. Yeah, one of the things I'm so grateful for being last is that the scariest thing in Stowaway happens after the movie is done, when you realize it and sitting with it. And so if they had put me in the middle or first, I'm not sure it would have been as successful. So I'm just very grateful.
Yeah, it's very strong Twilight Zone energy in that regard, where the worst thing that happens is once it's done. So I love that.
Now there's just time.
Yeah, exactly that.
Uh-huh.
I wanted to ask a little bit about the editing process too, because I've read some interviews with you where you said, and I might be paraphrasing here, your first reaction to your assembly edit is that I fucked up my movie. We don't talk about editing. We don't talk about enough about the process of finding the movie in your movie. When you sit down and look at everything you've got and you're like, all right, I have a movie, but what is my movie? What was that like for you?
Well, I talked to a couple of my friends who are musicians yesterday, and they're in the middle of their album. And one of them turned to me and was like, I'm at that part in the process where I hate everything, where I just think it's total crap. And I find that to be a very universal artistic experience. I've had it as an actor, where when you're working on a scene, there will be a section of time where you think you are going to embarrass yourself and you'll never find it. and you're a fraud, and this is the time everyone's going to find out that you don't know what you're doing. And my experience of directing was basically that almost the whole time, except for the act of shooting. But when it was the worst was at first assembly. And all of the directors, I have a handful of director friends who I cherish and I respect and who have great careers that I just admire. And everyone was like, oh man, wait till you get to first assembly. And I was like, it's cool. I'll be fine. Like I've felt things before. And the first assembly happened and I sobbed harder than I have in 10 years. This is not a joke. And for anyone who is like considering directing, prepare yourself for heartbreak. I cried so hard that my daughter was worried about me and drew me a picture that says, Mom, all emotions are okay. Because it's what I say to her when she's having a meltdown. Yeah. That like we can hang out with any of these weather storms and everything passes. But I was just outside on the phone with Samantha Sloyan being like, not only is this movie bad, this movie is so bad, they're not even going to let me act anymore. Like they're going to take me away from everything. And the hardest part of directing was after you're done crying and you're empty and you're certain that you've ruined your career, realizing that that is the beginning. And it is. And then you brush off your knees from falling to the ground to curse God. And you walk back into the editing room and everyone looks at you puffy-faced and tear-stained. And you're like, all right, can you take me back and show me if we have another take of the interview? Just take me there. And you find the one scene that you really know. And I would just be like, show me everything. And then I said, oh, okay. And then eventually we got to the stuff like the takeoff, where I was like, I had done all the tricks I knew how to do. I did the shaky cam that they use in Fight Club. Like I went in and I was like, give me the digital face stretch, because we had a mannequin that had the digital face. I wanted it all practical. And it was just looking like some cheap thing. And I was like, all right, let's start layering things. And then because we were using diegetic sound, I was like, every time we go to static, we have to stop the takeout noise, but I want the levels to be exactly the same so that the energy doesn't break. So I want the tone of the takeoff to be the same level tone as the static, so that we're moving all the way through, but you still believe as we go from tape to static that this is happening and the tape is skipping. And then I want it like, and then silence. And I started, when I was in sound mix, like conducting it. And I would be there and I'd be like, you can't see me because there's no video, but I look like a crazy person trying to turn a lever.
She's helping. She's illustrating the points, folks.
Yeah. And so it's not for the faint of heart, the editing process, but it's probably the most fulfilling.
But I'm hearing it didn't completely burn you out on the process, because you're talking about doing other stuff in the future too. So apparently coming out on the other end of that, there is excitement for whatever project comes next, whatever short or feature comes. You find your stride. Yeah,
it's like having babies. I had a second kid. I'm going to make more movies.
You forget the pain.
You forget the pain and you love it. Look at that floaty little dinosaur. That can't be the end.
Well, I could talk about your short for probably the rest of the hour, but you picked a really cool movie for us. And I know you're really, really excited to talk about that too. So we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Ghostwatch. All right, welcome back. So today we're going to be talking about Ghostwatch. And if you haven't seen the film, if you weren't one of the lucky few that saw it back when and thought that it was legit, let's give you a quick plot synopsis. In 1992, those brave enough to tune into BBC One on Halloween were given an unexpected treat. Longtime television host Michael Parkinson, broadcasting live from the studio, led a special BBC segment called Ghostwatch, which combined on-site segments from a local haunted property with in-studio experts on the occult. As the night goes on, millions of British viewers were horrified to watch the Ghostwatch crew get picked apart by an evil spirit. The only twist? It was entirely fabricated and pre recorded, and soon became famous as the greatest mass media hoax this side of Orson Welles. Kate, what made you want to talk about Ghostwatch?
Ugh, Ghostwatch is so good. I mean, this movie came out in 92, right?
Yeah.
And it is just as effective now. This is the type of movie that like grabs an audience by their most tender bits. And it just, because you can picture an entire viewing audience going crazy if this was happening. If there's something so delightful in the Britishness of it that makes it feel so realistic all the way up into the end. It's a type of film I love. I loved Late Night with the Devil, which has its roots in movies like Ghostwatch. And the idea that once again, everybody can be doing their best, and then that's what's going terribly wrong.
Donato, had you seen this one before? Was this the first time watch? It was for me, but I feel like you've seen this one.
I own the special edition, whatever.
Dang,
Scream
right, you
Factory.
do.
Yeah. Oh no. This has been, as a found footage lover and also someone who loves like WNUF Halloween special. I think Ghostwatch is so special because of, number one, what it did. It is the War of the Worlds for, a later generation, and they pulled it off. Like, it's crazy that they pulled it off like they did. On the Blu-ray, there's some commentary where Leslie Manning, the director, is talking, and like one of her friends was a school teacher, and there were kids like coming to school the next day, like talking about it like it was still real. I mean, like the BBC said, no, it's not real. Like, they clarified after, but like the kids were still all jazzed up and then like wrote Leslie Manning letters and stuff. Yeah. So I think the pop culture-ness of it is gripping. But also, again, the fact that there are legitimate like replications of it that have come after. I mean, again, Late Night with the Devil, perfect one. Like, that is inspired so much by Ghostwatch. But WNUF, another one came out, Haunted Ulster Live, recently. Yeah. Just everyone trying to recapture Ghostwatch, and it'll never happen.
But it's also, I think, Blair Witch Project owes a little bit to this, because I'm old enough to be the person who saw Blair Witch and thought it was real. Same. And thought it was a documentary, and how effective that was. And like, it's again using found footage to its most extreme effect, and how something that now has become a shorthand for a cheap movie actually is a style of movie that can be supremely successful.
Yeah, like, I like how found footage has evolved into web, and web has evolved into live stream, because like all these live stream movies now, I think, people do think it's cheap. Like, found footage cheap. It's just a camera. You just run with it, shake it around, blah, blah, blah. But to me, like, no, you have to replicate the organic experience of watching a live stream now. Kids are glued to their phones all the time. You have to get the chat box right. You have to get everything right now for these kind of things.
Yes. Well, people have a real heightened bullshit detector for stuff that they see every day. And the second you pull them out of it, it's all going to fall apart. Like, it's a high wire act. And you also, it becomes imperative with found footage that it's important what you see and what you don't see. Ghostwatch does that very well, about like at what moment the camera will show you something versus the camera is turned away from the thing. And also pacing becomes very important in found footage.
Yeah, the only time you will see the fully bloodied, actually gross version of Mr. Pipes, the villain, let's say, is if you go into the special features and watch one single special feature that has a single picture of it. Otherwise, you are correct. Like, Leslie Manning is talking, like, what's scary is what we don't see. What's scary is what our minds do. And is the figure in it every once in a while. Of course, Mr. Pipes has to be there, at least in the background or something. But we don't ever see the gnarly version that they did full makeup on, and they just were like, no, like, we know what he looks like. You can do whatever you want in your head with that.
Yes. It's so good. And you can't fake that. Like, I don't think it would be as successful if they didn't make him up in the full, if they didn't have the plan, right? Because, any movie can be cheap, but found footage can be super cheap if you think of it as cheap. And just like, well, we don't need to make the guy. We'll never see the guy. But if your shark doesn't fail on the day, you can't have the genius of Jaws.
Yeah, I was going to mention Bruce. I'm glad you did.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was thinking, because I watched this for the first time, so this was a first time watch for me, and I'm not saying that this was my experience, but I would be curious. We'll start with Kate. How you would if this feels like for modern audiences, if it's so anchored in the context of its release that if you can get the full enjoyment of it, if you're just like scrolling through Shutter and watching something, I'll bury the lead. I think it's absolutely entertaining in its own right. But is it, if people are, it is a little bit like the Blair Witch, and people are like, oh, it's the scariest movie ever. New generations come to it and they're like, I mean, was that really that scary? Is its own mythology overtake Ghostwatch a little bit, or should you just watch it and be like, it's a bonkers idea that they executed, and it's really, really good?
You know, this year was the first year I ever watched A Christmas Story,
Hmm.
and that movie is like a nostalgic touchstone for so many kids. And I had the same question about A Christmas Story, and I loved it. And I think the same is true of Ghostwatch. Is it going to ruin your week like it did people who saw it that week?
Yeah.
No. Will it be an incredibly enjoyable movie nonetheless? Yes.
Yeah, because I think the effectiveness is not the trick itself. We didn't have to actually watch the live showing to get
Mhm.
what's going on. It adds to it, obviously. If we were all there watching it, I'm sure we would have a different appreciation of it. But the film itself and its structure, I think it's just impressive for what it is doing, and especially for at the time. Like that is an unforeseen type of found footage at that era.
Yeah.
We're talking
Yeah.
about 92. So this is before Blair Witch, it's before Paranormal Activity and like all
Mhm.
these popularizations of it. So to have it on such a grand scale, I think that's just crazy, because we think about found footage today, and I think it's Kate mentioned before, like it's seen as cheaper, and it is. Like a lot of indie found footage movies are coming out now, but not like the mainstream, like we had As Above So Below or Shyamalan's The Visit and stuff.
Mhm.
They don't really do those big budget types anymore. And this was literally a BBC project on their studios with the actual anchors. Like, come on, like
Yeah.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, it's because it's more than a trick. It's more than tricking the audience. It's a great film in its own right, in the way that you don't have to believe that you're watching this late night show in the 70s to enjoy Late Night with the Devil.
And as I went back and rewatched Stowaway today as a refresher, and I was kind of struck on the rewatch, having seen Ghostwatch now.
Mhm.
There's some thematic tissue between the two of them, I feel like, because they are both stories about skeptics or people who want to believe that truly believe that there's more out there, that are coming across the fact that, like, oh shit, there is actually more out there, and this is what happens when it pops up and say hello. So I was really surprised and kind of delighted by the fact that Haley, the character, and a bunch of the speakers that they have throughout the course of the film seem like they're kind of operating from the same general place of like, wouldn't it be cool if? Oh, what do you mean? It actually is.
Yeah. I love that. I love this idea of the bird dancing in the crocodile's mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think both of these movies are doing that because you're playing with something bigger than yourself.
Well, and bigger than yourself. And I think my favorite parts of it are when Michael Parkinson, like the main host, let's
Mhm.
say, is talking to the experts and taking phone calls, and it's that delicate balance of, all right, we were doing a fun thing here for a little bit, like we were taking our calls and they're saying crazy stuff now, so let's start shutting it off. Let's start shutting it down. Let's stop believing. Like, we have been presented with evidence now, and it's no longer funny, haha, so now I don't want to deal with it anymore. Like, I think that's such an interesting, instead of wanting to engage with it, it's, oh no, this has to be a hoax, because I don't want to believe it's real. And I think
Yeah.
that touch to it is so, that's the accomplishment. Like, if the American version of this is so different, the Britishisms make this, the Britishisms are the like prim and proper at certain points, and
Yes.
let's hide it stuff, where I think the American version is like the gonzo kind of full bore in, like, oh yeah bro, let's go, like stuff like that.
I mean, there's something there, right? Like there's a remake in my head where it is on like a Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan just
Oof.
like, yeah, gets eaten alive. God bless. But what they've done beautifully is the difference between Michael and Sarah, who is the reporter in there and wants and cares about these people and wants the answer. So you get both types of main character. And then, I don't love that her husband is a part of this. I think that adds an unnecessary, but it's the 90s. What are you going to do? She can't just
Yeah.
be a woman on her own.
And
Yeah,
with
and he's very worried about her, so it
He's so
reflects nicely on
worried.
him, right?
Yeah,
So,
what a good man. So worried.
in the special features, she's talking about getting the role, and literally her husband was reading over her shoulder and being like, oh, can I be in this too? Like, so like that's how it came about. She got the role and he's like, I want to
Listen,
be in it too.
As someone who gets cast by her husband quite a bit, like, no shade. Go for it.
Yeah.
Shoot your shot.
I also love about this film. I don't think that we really had a visual language for what ghost busting looks like, and it seems so ahead of its time when it comes to, they have the early shots where they're like, here's our infrared camera that will allow us to see what's going on in there, and here's like, we're going to put up sound sensors and all this other stuff that they do throughout the film. Now we accept that those are sort of tropes, right? Like, we expect if you're doing a movie about ghost watchers, you're going to have all of these things, but it feels in the scientific sense, it also feels progressive. It feels like if the BBC were to legitimately investigate this, that in 1992, these are the tools that they would afford themselves to do. And I think that's part of the fun of it. Is there's a part of me that was like, okay, but like, did they actually get proof of all? Like, what does the filming process look like? I want to know more about that.
Yeah. There's also some joy in oh, I lost it. I had it and it was gone. But I think you're right. I think it added to the believability.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to have them at the front of science, right? This is a real legitimate news station that is legitimately trying to find out what's going on here. Oh, it was the fact that they revealed a little bit of a hoax.
Yes.
Great
Nice
twist
touch.
right in the middle. Having the older sister making the noises was just brilliant, because it allowed us to have that tension release of like, oh, okay, I know where this is going. Like, I knew it. It's a hoax. And then it really like takes off is great.
I love the infrared scene because
Yeah.
it drags you on that typical journey of, okay, we can see one outline, we can see another outline, those are humans. When is the other one going to appear? And it doesn't, and that's better because I am just sitting there clenched the whole time.
Yeah.
And I don't stop after that. It just cuts back to another interview, and I'm just like, I'm still in that disturbed state. And they do a good, like, Leslie Manning, the director, does a great job of cutting between everything and like maneuvering through the interviews and through the on-site stuff, and knows when to go back and forth. Like, that is hard. She's a producer at that point. She's a live producer and director, like, even though it's not live, and to mix
top to
both
bottom,
of those.
the filmmaking is exceptional, just as a straight up movie and mimicking a live broadcast.
And I know that there's, one of the things that I always clue in on, especially it seems like it happens a lot in haunted house movies, is the child actors. And I know that, like, as a filmmaker, as a parent, as an actor, is what makes a really good child performance? Like, what makes these kids so believable within this context? Do you have any easy answers for, what makes those performances stand out?
I think it is easier to direct children in found footage, because if they are awkward, you are implying there's a camera there. And so the awkwardness of a child actor trying to act can be offset by the belief that they're in front of a camera. And then later, I forgive almost everything that reads to me as false as being an exceptional situation. You don't know how anyone's going to react in these exceptional situations. And so that's, to me, that's the solution there, is that the kids, when they seem stiff, it's okay because they're on camera.
Yeah, they're reacting how any of us would react. And I think that's always going to be the breaking point for some people watching found footage. Like, it's just not for them. They want the glossy version of this movie that is shot traditionally. They want Late Night with the Devil. That's actually the way to say it. They don't want to see this version of it. They want the Hollywoodized or whatever like that. And to me, my response is always, but that is the authenticity of found footage is what makes it one of my favorite subgenres. Like, I want to feel that organic discomfort and awkwardness, because that's terrifying. Like, when someone is just reacting how I would react in said scenario, I get that. I believe that. That's what gets me in.
Well, it's the difference between believability and authenticity. I had this debate yesterday with somebody about David Fincher, and let's say we all love David Fincher's movies, but for me, Seven is number one and Zodiac is number two. And for the person I was talking to, Zodiac is number one and Seven is number two, like by a 1% degree. And for me, it's the grittiness of Seven. It's his second movie. He makes some mistakes. Some ADR doesn't really match up. It doesn't ring true. But the kinetic energy of potential was so much more interesting to me than the perfection of Zodiac. And of course, there are also mistakes in Zodiac. It's a piece of art. It's not advertising. But like, by Zodiac, he'd smoothed out a lot of the edges. And that's the same reason I love found footage. I love independent film. Seeing the mistakes and the grittiness makes me more excited than seeing perfection.
That's how I feel. It always gets me in trouble when I say this, but that's how I feel about Paul Thomas Anderson. I like his earlier stuff because it's so much messier and like cold auteur genius. I get it, but there's just something about those second and third films for a lot of filmmakers when you're like, you are still trying to prove yourself because you don't know if you're going to get to make the next one. And then when it becomes clear you can make whatever you want, you do great things still, but it's more fun when you have the infant terrible attitude and you're like, I am gonna make Hollywood fucking take notice of me. And that I hadn't made that connection before, but that I see that a lot in found footage too, because it's people that are like, I have to make my own way. I've got to make you notice me.
Yeah, and I think it's especially now that everyone has a camera in their hand that's better than almost anything they used on Ghostwatch, that anybody who has a point of view and a story to tell can rise above what is pretty basic equipment.
Yeah, I mean, like Ghostwatch's big technological advancement is the fact that they have a television that they can draw on, and even that was done in post-production effects. So, like, that wasn't even
cool.
available at the time for them too.
I mean, you really can do it yourself. You really
Yeah.
you really could make a movie yourself, and people will forgive so many mistakes for potential and kinetic energy.
Yeah, I mean, Monagle, really quickly, if you want a really bad Paul Thomas Anderson take, I think Inherent Vice is my favorite of his, and it's the fucking messiest thing he's ever done, and I'm okay with that.
Inherent Vice is the one of his films that I haven't seen, so
Yeah.
that stands absolutely to reason. Now I'm going to watch that and come back to you.
It is not beloved, but me and my friend think it's his best. Anyway, though, that is a different conversation.
That's neither
for
here
a different podcast.
We'll do Punch Drunk Love on a future podcast. I think people will be into it.
What a perfect film.
Absolutely perfect film.
Like, if I was Adam Sandler and I didn't win awards for that, I too would only make movies with my friends in Hawaii.
Well, he did have that wonderful Indie Spirit Awards speech where he basically got to say everything he would have said. So I feel like he got one over on all of us in the end.
Sure did.
Let me ask, I want to pivot to an older film of yours, because on this podcast, we like to talk a lot about films that are ripe for rediscovery. And a lot of times films through no fault of their own that maybe have faded from the public view and are only now in a modern era of 4Ks and Blu-rays and, streaming coming back. You made Hush. Hush is a fantastic film. It was regarded as a fantastic film when it came out, but because of difficulty in having access to it, it kind of faded a little bit from the public view. And it's only been the last year and a half that it's been getting theatrical screenings, a home video release, and people are rediscovering it for the first time. So I'm curious for something like a Ghostwatch, where this is a movie that wasn't available, it was just gone, and it started to come back a little bit. That's an experience that you've been through. Can you talk a little bit about what that's like as a creator to be like, I made something, I'm proud of it, I know it's good, but through legal reasons, for other stuff, like I just can't get in front of people the way that I want to?
Yeah, we were very lucky that Netflix bought our movie in terms of mortgage and rent.
Mm-hmm.
But we had different dreams for it. Also, Netflix in no short part led to The Haunting of Hill House and things like that. It did a lot of wonderful things. But what's most exciting about the Shout Factory release of Hush is that we were able to go back as filmmakers 10 years later and reopen the project. And so on that DVD, you have the original Hush, which is messy, like you guys are talking about, and full of potential and can we and first timers really at bat. And then after a decade of work, it's now in black and white without a score, which elevates it for me into the second half of mine and Mike's career, with a little bit more discernment and a little bit more taste and a little bit more trust in our audience. And so I would be interested in talking to the director of Ghostwatch, how they would change it in the update, because seeing it kind of fade away, when a resurgence happens, you rediscover it. Like, I hadn't seen Hush on a screen in 10 years, 8 years. The last time I saw it on a big screen was a screening at Alamo Drafthouse in Austin. And when they came back in to ask us to do the commentary, we watched it on a big screen again. And I was like, look at those babies. Yeah. Look at those little babies toddling around making a movie. It was delightful. It's actually, I found it to be a very satisfying experience. But I can imagine it's not always that.
Like, Ghostwatch could have a fun resurgence in the sense, though, that it could be like a lost relic from, it was on television and like it went away for its own reasons of, well, yeah, we're
Mhm.
not going to release or anything like that. There would be a cool, in my mind, a cool concept of like a sequel that believes it's real, and like kids find it on the internet or something like that, like they
Yeah.
pirate Ghostwatch or something. I feel like that would be a fun recontextualization to like modernize it and give it a second life of like, oh wait, Ghostwatch actually was real, and it's the movie that the television
Yeah.
event no one told you about. Blah, blah, blah.
Exactly. Oh,
There
yeah.
is I was reading, there's sort of a short story sequel that the
There's
director wrote that's like
Mhm.
somewhere. I don't even know where it is. Donato, have you checked that out?
No, I have not checked it out.
Okay.
It is one of those, it exists in the ether, but I have not dug too deep into the Ghostwatch lore in that way.
Fair
Ooh,
enough.
let's
There
see.
for the finding if you look for it. Well, that brings us to the last question that we always ask on the show, Kate. And I think that we hit on a little bit here, but with a film like Ghostwatch, we're curious how we get this in front of a new generation of viewers, right? There are the Anglophiles that, hey, it's a BBC ghost story. I'm going to watch it no matter what. There's the Shudder fans. Hey, it's on Shudder. I'm going to watch it no matter what. But something like this feels like it has real potential to appeal to not. It's a PG horror movie in essence. Like it's a
Yeah.
great thing for you to sit and watch down to sit down and watch it with your family members. So how do you think Ghostwatch finds that next generation of new audiences?
Well, I think that horror audiences are more discerning than they've been in the past. They're people are really starting to take horror seriously. And so when you tell people who love Blair Witch or who love Late Night with the Devil or who love any of the iterations that come behind, you need to watch the first one. It's like The Exorcist. You got to watch the first one. You
Yeah.
need to see that. Or like when we talk about Nosferatu coming back around, you can go through a whole journey of Nosferatus if you want. And so if you find yourself with a group of friends who love horror and you guys want to go on a found footage journey, like this is where it starts. And you can watch found footage grow and change, and filmmakers that you love grow and change through the medium. I think I don't know, I would recommend this movie to any smart moviegoer, and I think at least 90% of moviegoers want to describe themselves as smart.
I mean, these days, if you see a movie in a theater, you're immediately in the smart percent because you know to value that experience. So if you've seen a movie in the theater in the last 6 months, Ghostwatch is for you.
I mean, I think Ghostwatch is just a great movie. Do you like good scary movies? You will like Ghostwatch.
Donato.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I already own the special edition release. It's nice, big, and bulky, so it has prominent placement on my amongst all the other movies. But for me, on the critic side of thing, like when I'm writing about A Late Night with the Devil or when I'm writing about WNUF, like it is my job to mention Ghostwatch and say, hey, I love what this movie is doing because it's pulling from this other really great movie, and just trying to connect the dots so the few people that still read reviews are picking up on, you know, the older stuff. So I've that's what I've been doing. Every time I get a chance to mention Ghostwatch, it's there. Every time I write about Halloween movies, it's there. Shudder is the, you know, easier avenue now for everyone who has it, and it's just available for streaming. You don't have to go pirate it anymore and stuff like that, because again, it was a lost film for so long. I remember being at Fantastic Fest, and Chris Tilley from the UK was telling me stories about Ghostwatch that I couldn't watch, and I just couldn't do it. So I was like, oh damn, like yeah, man, it was so cool. But it's word of mouth. It's one of these movies that this is like a horror lovers movie. It's not like something that's come out in the last decade. It's not something that missed its window, you know, theatrically or something. This is a curio. This is War of the Worlds 2.0. You had to be there kinda, but you didn't, because now everyone can watch it, and you just got to keep telling people to do it.
Also, if you're the kind of person who wants to impress people, if someone comes up to me and is like, I loved Ghostwatch, I'm like, you have taste. Let's have a conversation. Do you like impressing people at dinner parties? Watch Ghostwatch.
Right. Everyone can say their favorite found footage movie is Paranormal Activity or Blair Witch. Like everyone does. I mean, Paranormal Activity is my favorite found footage movie, but still, like,
I love
you know.
Paranormal Activity, don't get me wrong. But do you know how excited I was to drop Ghostwatch for you guys in the email? Because I was like, she's got taste. She's got style. She understands history. Yeah.
I immediately, I saw Ghostwatch and I knew exactly the kind of conversation we're going to have. I clued in already. I was like, no, this is going to be great. We don't have to worry about this.
Yep.
I feel like we've really, with our weird, bizarre, completely arbitrary criteria of 10 or fewer Rotten Tomatoes reviews, we've learned a lot about people with just one movie selection. It kind of boils them down to their essence, which is a lot of fun for us to see.
Yeah.
Well, that is it. That is our Ghostwatch episode. You can stream VHS Beyond on Shudder. You can buy this, the home video release is out, correct? For
Yeah, I
VHS
guess
Beyond
so.
as well. Yeah, you can go buy that if you prefer home video for all the reasons we've talked about today. And you can see Ghostwatch on Shudder too. Maybe someday we'll have a VHS Beyond Ghostwatch double VHS release. Who knows, Shudder? If you were listening to this, there's a lot of different ways you could take it. But Kate, for everybody that's been listening that wants to stay in the loop about what's going on with you, your next projects, your next acting opportunities, next films, is there a couple of places online for folks to connect with you?
Um, honestly, right now I'm only on Blue Sky and I'm barely on that right now. My current project is trying to hold up democracy. And so the things I would pitch is like, write your congressman. If you're unhappy with how things are going, make change, become a part of the conversation, examine the role that Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter play in your life and what that means. I don't want to get preachy at all, but that's sort of where my focus and intention are now.
We welcome preachiness. I have a letter downstairs to Ted Cruz for all the fucking good it's going to do me that I'm
But
going to be
no, it
mailing out
will.
tomorrow.
It's a million tiny cuts.
I know.
We must. And you have to believe that putting that kind of energy out into the universe and also like into your community. The California wildfires came and decimated our city and people came out in droves and supported each other. That counts too. Like right now, I love movies. I'm going to go make movies. I got some cool stuff coming up, but right now we need to support each other through what's going on in the world, whatever that means to you.
Are there any, I know that a lot of people have been sharing the nonprofits, the organizations, the mutual aid funds that they care about in Los Angeles. Are there any organizations that you would like to plug to, ones that you've personally donated to or think that are doing a really good job?
I recommend going through GoFundMe's and trying to find legitimate ones to get money to people to use right away. I always donate to the Human Rights Campaign. I think there's erasure happening in this country that needs to be addressed. If you can't donate, I think of volunteering for any kind of community kitchen or community gathering, things like that, getting involved in your government at the local levels are all really great ways to do. Also, adopt, don't shop. They're animals that need help. God, everything's falling apart. My God.
I am delighted that our conversation began with the human centipede and ended with saving democracy. That sort of feels like just the only kind of thing you'd have with a Kate Siegel podcast. I really love that for us.
Yeah, I guess that tracks.
Donato, if people want to stay connected with you online, where do they go?
Yeah, you can follow me at DonatoBomb on Blue Sky as well. We do not use the Twitter anymore. I still am weaning off Instagram. Blue Sky is testing their Instagram replacement.
I'm in.
Yeah, it's called Pink Sky. So if you are curious about it, check it. It connects to your Blue Sky, so all your followers stay, and it's just a shared account. So
that's the promise of the federated internet, my friend, is everything is connected no matter where you are.
So
just
do that.
Like all of us.
Correct.
And then the letterbox is always there because I just saw a bunch of Sundance movies with reviews and stuff like that. So they're posted on the socials. I will continue to do such things. But again, echoing what Kate said, all that great stuff. And I think the community stuff too gets forgotten a little bit. Like everyone is donating immediately to these bigger funds and stuff like that. But 2 weeks ago, our friend hosted just a little, hey, come over. I bought a bunch of just a bunch of like floss, toothpaste, toothbrushes, and we just put together little packets that were going to go somewhere. And it took all of 2 hours, and we had snacks, we had drinks, but we still did something that could go back into the community. So it's like it doesn't have to be $1 million donations. It can be these little gestures as well that just still help.
Yeah, for myself, you can follow me on Blue Sky. And since the focus is rightfully shifted on other stuff, I will say that today I subscribe to ProPublica, 404 Media, Rolling Stones, Wired, and Hellgate, which is an independent publication out of New York. A lot of media companies are failing us in this particular moment. So if there is a local or independent news outlet that you really like, because they're the ones that are going to give you stories about what's happening in LA, what's happening in DC, things like that, places you can trust, make sure that good journalism is worth your money as well. So,
and isn't that true of Ghostwatch? If Ghostwatch could convince people that there was a poltergeist, what is your media convincing you?
We're done. Thank you, Kate Siegel. That was so great to have you on this show. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Pipes.